So I got a little winch truck job to do this evening, and I want to show you a kind of interesting oil well. I thought you might want to go along. Show you my little winch truck here. It's a 95 model F800. It's got a 5.9 Cummins in it, a P-pump 5.9 with the fuel plate removed and a set of 250 horse over injectors. It's a little bit hot rodded. It's a little bit cold natured because of the big injectors. Let's crank it up though. It's a little smoky when it's cold. It clears up pretty quick. Let's go out there. Kind of back in the jungle on this one. So what we got going here is it had a wrist pin bearing go out. Now there's quite a few businesses around here, obviously, that work all kind of oil field stuff, and there's varying degrees of what you know of what you can pay for, basically. And there's companies that do everything. This is actually a buddy of mine owns a machine shop, and they'll come out and work on the units, but they don't have any equipment. So basically last week I came out here and unhooked the well from the unit, and they pulled both of these wrist pins out, rebuilt them, brought them back out today and put them back in. And the meanwhile, when this thing was down, I had a backhoe come out here. We dug a trench, replaced the electrical box, run conduit up the pole, and buried new wire back to here, bring all the electrical up to code. And then he went around here. There was some junk laying around here. There was a belt guard, there was some belts in here and some other crap, and we hauled all that off. And then he kind of scraped around. I actually dug a hole there and dumped. There was a bunch of wood over here for some reason, like timbers. We dumped them all in there and buried them. Just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. Need to pull up about 6 inches. Now the only thing holding this is just the friction of this cable pulling tight. So I want to be able to I want to make sure and keep myself in a position where if this turns loose, I'm not in a way that's going to get my hand cut off or something. Anyway, of course this cable's in the perfect wrong spot. Try to turn this. Then there's a window that goes in this throttle. This one you can actually put in after you set the weight on it. So I'm gonna get off of it with a truck, set it on the unit, so we're not scared of my fingers getting between something heavy. All right, so that little plate there with the 2 bolts basically just keeps this polish rod from being able to fall out of the bridle. So I've got to hook up the electrical back here. Like I say, we buried new wire across here. Don't make fun of me, I'm pretty short of tools. My winch truck usually requires a support vehicle. When you're hooking up a 3-phase motor, the second wire you hook up is the one that determines which direction the motor turns. So when the first wire doesn't make any difference, you just hook it up to whichever. When you hook the second wire up, you've got 2 options. This goes one way and this goes the other. If you're not electrical savvy with 3-phase, that's a joke. I mean, it's technically true, I suppose. Anyway, the second wire is the one that determines which direction it goes, either one way or the other. And when you get the last wire, there's only one place to hook it up, so it doesn't, last wire doesn't matter. So this thing in the 60s had a gas engine on it. I think my great-grandpa bought this in 54, something like that. And back in the 60s, maybe up till the mid-70s, I'm not sure, had a gas engine on it. This well doesn't require hardly any maintenance. We never do anything over here. It's just sort of like a, I don't know, like a mutual fund. It makes about as much money as a mutual fund. And anyway, there's a spark plug right there. And I guarantee that spark plug has been laying there and undisturbed for at least, even if it was 1980, that's 42 years. Probably more like 50 years that spark plug has just been laying there. And I'm the first person that touched it up. Probably a rat or two crawl over it, but Champion 44. Pretty neat. All right, take the brake off. Good old Chinesium. I would hate to live in that house up there and listen to that all night. So kind of the point of this whole video was a phenomenon that goes on with this well. It's kind of unusual. It may not be actually all that unusual around the world, but it's really unusual in this part of the world, especially for a well that's drilled in the 50s. But anyway, I did a terrible job trying to explain it out there, and so I'm going to start over. And before we get into this, you need to have a basic understanding, maybe not of how it works and all, but you need a basic understanding of what's in the ground. And so I've got a picture here, and I'm going to flip you around to a screenshot. I'm going to show you this picture and talk about what's going on here. Okay, so here's a very rough drawing of a well. And so the black represents, this black here is the casing. So there's a hole drilled in the ground. It's slightly bigger than the casing. The casing measures 5.5 OD. Nothing here is to scale. There's a hole that's probably 7 7/8, so it's slightly bigger than this. That's actually drilled in the ground. And then the casings run in, and their cement would be between the outside of the 5.5 and the actual hole that's in the ground. So anyway, this is cemented in the ground. This is the well casing. This is the actual hole in the ground represented in the black. The green is the tubing, and this is what fluid is pumped up. It runs down here, comes up, and it is 2-inch to 2 3/8 OD. This would be like the pump and tea and stuffing box. This is obviously terrible drawing. And then this would be the flow line connection that actually goes to the tank batteries. So the big gray chunk here is actually the stuffing box, and it's what's got rubbers in it that work like a seal. Underneath that is a pump and T, and all that is just a steel connection, just like a T or a 90 or whatever, but it's formulated to work in this situation. It's got two different, or actually three different types of threads. But anyway, it's screwed onto the tubing, the fluid comes up the tubing and then makes a right-hand turn and goes out the flow line towards the tank batteries. Of course, the stuffing box screws on the top of it, and then there's a 1-inch that goes the other way. It's referred to as a bleeder. Now, this black box here is actually the wellhead. This wellhead is screwed on top of the casing. It's got a couple of connections that come out here. There would be a vent. This line shouldn't be drawn here so that any gas that comes in the well comes up the casing and out the vent in the wellhead. Of course, this can be sold if there's substantial quantities, or disvented, depending on where you're at and regulations. Now this well here, about 2/3 of the wellhead is actually underground, and that's stupid. I don't know why they do that. But the ring you see that's close to the ground is the top of the wellhead, and if you look to the right, there's a small quarter-inch valve sticking up, and it's got a vent that's comes out of the ground and then points up, and that's the casing vent I'm talking about. The red is representative of the polish rod up here. This is a shiny brass part you see, and it turns to sucker rods. The rods go to the bottom. There would be a pump down here. We're not going to discuss a pump. It doesn't really matter, and I wasn't going to try to draw it. Anyway, the tubing is suspended in this black box here that's called the wellhead. The wellhead here has got a set of slips, and when you set the tubing down with a rig, these slips catch the tubing, and the tubing is suspended all right here. So this 3,000 foot of tubing is just dangling, if you would, down in this hole that's in the earth, down in this casing. Now these lines here represent the perforations, so they're holes blown in the casing that are blown into the formation. So there's a sand formation that would be at this depth, and these are shot into that formation to allow the oil to leach into the casing. So how this works is the oil leaches into the casing, obviously falls to the bottom, and this slowly fills the casing up to whatever static level you would have. We'll discuss in a minute. Then the pump, which is actuated by the rods, actually sucks the fluid in from the bottom of the tubing of the pump and pumps it up the tubing and out the flow line. And obviously, when you're pulling fluid in the bottom of the pump, you'll be lowering the fluid in the annulus between the casing and the tubing. The fluid here would fall. So this well makes, if you run it every day, it makes about 2 barrels, roughly 2 barrels of oil, and maybe a barrel or two of water. It makes very little water for around here, though probably to some people that might be a lot. It makes mostly oil. Now the cool thing about this well is that if you leave it shut down, it will make about the same amount of oil if you only run it like 3 days every other week as it does if you run it every day, and it makes almost no water if you do it that way. Anyway, this well, the oil that this thing makes is a very light grade of oil. It's almost like a naphtha or something. You can wash tools, you can wash your hands in it. Of course, it's still got heavy hydrocarbons. It's not clear. It's dark green, and it got some paraffin and stuff in it. But for the most part, it's a very thin oil. It's thinner than diesel, I would think. Not quite like gasoline, but it's you could, if you have something really greasy, you can actually throw tools in it and wash tools in it. Now with that, you get a lot of highly volatile hydrocarbons like propane and butane and ethane, and I'm going to get them all mixed up. The ones that boil at atmospheric temperature and pressure, at ambient temperature and atmospheric pressure. I said that incorrectly. So anyway, I'm going to make some numbers up, but the oil that's in the formation down in the ground is probably got a pressure of around 1,000 pounds. Now that's a made-up number, but it's reasonably it's an educated guess. It's probably around 1,000 psi in the formation. That's how it's held in the ground. Now this formation is very has low permeability, so things move slowly through the formation. If you had a formation with 1,000 pounds of pure oil with a high permeability, the well would make 100 barrels a day or something. Anyway, the fluid moves very slowly through there, so it leaches slowly into the formation. Obviously, this is what hydraulic fracturing helps, and this well had the crap fracked out of it when they dug it in the 50s. They not like the fracks of today, but for a well around here, it absolutely had the crap fracked out of it. Anyway, this well, the formation that under pressure, under 1,000 pounds of pressure, has these highly volatile hydrocarbons like propane or whatever. Let's just use propane as an example. Liquefied. They're under such pressure that they can't boil, and it's actually liquid propane that's mixed in with the oil. Now what happens is when you shut this well down, the fluid level in the casing begins to rise. It slowly fills up at a rate of a barrel or two a day, whatever it is. And after you get a couple of 100 feet of fluid in the casing, then you have more than enough pressure to hold the propane back from boiling. So you end up with a column of oil that has mixed in with it liquid propane, liquid butane, whatever. So anyway, the fluid level in this well, if you leave it down for several weeks, will get up to about 1,000 feet from surface. So you have about 2,000 feet. The well's roughly 3,000 feet. You'll have about 2,000 feet column of oil stacked up in the casing. So the bottom pressure of the pressure at the bottom well is roughly 1,000 pounds. It's got 1,000 pounds of hydrostatic pressure. So what happens is when you go turn the well on, the rods and the pump and the tubing start sucking from the bottom and bringing this oil to the surface. Now what happens is when this oil that's got mixed liquid propane in it and butane and everything else gets close to the surface, gets say 100 foot from surface, and the pressure now is 50 psi because of hydrostatic pressure, the propane begins to boil out of the oil. It turns from a very small amount of liquid that's mixed in with the oil to a large amount of vapor. And what this does is it causes a runaway so that the boiling gas pushes the oil out of the tubing into the tank really violently. It really gets after it. I got a few. I don't have any good videos of it. It only does it really good if you've had the well down a couple of months, and I'm running it more now, and I'm not going to leave it down a couple of months just to get a YouTube video. But I've got some old Snapchats of it from a year or so ago, and I'll kind of show you in a minute how it gets after the tank. But anyway, as the propane boils, it blows all of the oil that's in the tubing above where it starts boiling out, and down the flow line. Of course, once you get that little chunk of propane boiled off, now 100 foot under it, under 50 pounds of pressure, the propane starts boiling under it. And so what happens is you actually blow the tubing dry, or dry is perhaps not the right word, but you get a huge volume of gas that's blowing the liquid, the oil, out with the gas. Now what happens is the fluid level in the tubing actually becomes lower, or the total hydrostatic pressure top to bottom, because it's mostly gas now, there's not fluid in it, becomes lower than the fluid level that's in the casing. Now the pump has just got a couple of check valves in it. We're not going to go over how a pump works, like I said, but since you have a higher pressure now in the casing than you do in the tubing, the fluid will just open the check valves in the bottom of the pump and run more oil, more propane mixed oil into the bottom of the tubing. Anyway, it takes this a little while to get going. You start the well up, it has to bring fluid basically from the bottom of the hole all the way to the surface, because the oil that's already suspended in the tubing has when you pump the well, as the propane mixed oil comes into the well, the propane boils off and comes up the casing while you pump the what stays the liquid out. So when you start the well up after it's been sitting a while, you have to get the propaneless oil from the bottom of the well to the surface, which takes a number of hours, maybe 6 hours or something. The pumping is very small. It doesn't move much total fluid. But anyway, after 4, 5, or 6 hours, the well starts to kick, and it'll absolutely go crazy. I mean, the flow lines will flop, and it'll blow the hatch open on the oil tank. And anyway, if you let it sit a month, it'll make about 40 barrels within, it'll pump 6 hours, and then, make a couple of barrels in that 6 hours, and then kick off, and it'll make 40 barrels in like just a couple of hours, or maybe less than that, maybe an hour. Anyway, it's a really impressive thing to see. Well, if that was drilled at 52, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that would be 70 years old. Is that right? 70 years this year. Pretty sure it's dug in 52. Anyway, I know this isn't the technical definition of a well flowing, and it isn't. The well doesn't actually flow, but it will kick and put on a good show. And anyway, it's kind of neat. You got a 70-year-old well that'll put 40 barrels of oil in the tank and gas and everything else. Now, of course, after you run the well for 3 or 4 days, it pumps the casing dry, and everything's back to its 2 barrels, and it's it's very unimpressive. You open the bleeder, and it's just a little bit of oil and a little bit of water. There's not much goes on there. But anyway, that's about the size of it. I'll cut back to that other video I already did, and then I got a few Snapchats I'll show you. This is called a lubricator, and it's got felt in it. It just snaps around the polish rod, and they usually will sit down. This one I put new felt in, so it's trying to ride. It's nearly out of oil, but you put oil in these, and the felt on the oil will carry oil up and lubricate this liner. Good old green Texas oil right there. Smells like money. Blah blah blah. Know my head stopped up. You're probably sick of listening to me. I'll appreciate you watching, and like, share, subscribe, all the good things, and leave lots of comments, and catch you on the next project.